All right, hello everyone. We'll be starting our analysis shortly. Um, just to make sure that everything's going well, if you can hear me talking over the mic, please sound out in the chat, and we'll get started shortly. Of course, the screen is still blanked out for now, but we'll get that going soon enough. All right. Yep. Y'all can hear me. Wonderful. All right. Let's get going. Uh, Let me get my master of PowerPoints going. Oh, one more thing. I'll be following along in chat as well. So, okay. Let's get this going. Okay, you should see a wonderful screen right now. Give me a few moments while I get um, the chat going on my phone. Yep. So this is gonna be even though I'm going to be monologuing for most of this video, I'll also encourage discussion in the chat because that way we can, have more interaction than just you watching me monologuing. Okay. Um, nice one, Charlie. You better start with how they didn't bring back breaking news. Where's my breaking news? No. Yes, my avatar is still obsolete as ever. But anyway, formal introduction time. Welcome to episode 23. No. Welcome to System Core discussion. All right. So, the scoops are out. For those of you who haven't read them yet, I've put the link to the scoops in the video description. Go check it out for yourself from the source itself. So, what is System Core? I think the NISEI project team has done a much better job of explaining the purpose of System Core than I can ever. So I'm not gonna bother. I'm just gonna summarize very quickly what System Core is about. So because the process of designing new cards and playtesting them and releasing them and getting art for them is long and drawn out. There is going to be a drought period between Netrunner's cancellation, which was less than a month ago, to their anticipated release, which is Q1 2019. So that's what, at least 3-4 months? That's a long time to go without new cards. People are going to lose interest. So that is the main driving force behind System Core, to rejuvenate the meta and to prepare Netrunner for new cards moving forward. When I say prepare, I mean, of course, for the rotation of the next 2 cycles. As you all know, Luna and Sansan will be the next on the rotation chopping block. An interesting part about System Core is that there are now beginner and advanced identities on offer. So in the past, okay, give me a sec. Let me check out. Yep. Okay. Yep, Vadim, I'm starting early, but don't worry about it. I'm not actually getting into the meat of the video just yet. By the time it's on the hour, we'll actually start getting into the meat of the video, which is to discuss the changes in System Core. Anyway, back to what I was saying. In previous core sets, the old core set and revised core set, there was only one identity for each faction. So very simple, very basic game. What NISEI has done, I think is a very inspired decision, is to offer 2 IDs for each faction. So you have a beginner ID, a very simple ID, one that, is a very basic ID like Stronger Together, all eyes have +1 strength, or Baby W, 1 credit extra every time you transact. But then there are those more advanced IDs that do more than just a static increase or something simple. They substantially raise the skill ceiling needed to pilot optimally. So something like a Blue Sun, that's a very difficult ID to play optimally. So I think that's pretty cool, right? So you have this ability to transition within the core set, So it serves both as a tool for introducing new players to the game, as well as something that more intermediate to advanced players can hone their skills on, which is really wonderful, I think. Um, Finally, they also mentioned, NISEI mentioned that in the long term, they do plan to rotate deluxe expansions. Of course, this is a very long-term plan, and we really shouldn't be too concerned about it right now. But if you see some cards from System Core that are from the big boxes, that explains why. They likely want to save those cards. Cards like Dirty Laundry come to mind when you look at this bullet point here. Right, so what has changed exactly? With the new System Core, it's our new play, unless they are also in the new core set, like Hedge Fund, like Sure Gamble. Some old cards from others, but personally, I am all for it. As we'll go through the various changes that the card pool will see due to the new System Core, I think you will start to see why NISEI took this choice, and I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So yeah, hold your horses on that. We'll get to them when we actually talk about the cards. When we talk about the cards, we are mostly only going to look at cards from the semi-competitive and above level. So I'm not going to go through every single card change. That's going to be a waste of time. Yeah. So yeah, this is not going to be an exhaustive discussion of all the card changes. I'm just going to pick out those that I want to talk about. But feel free to discuss about the rest of the changes in the chat. I would love to hear everyone's opinion because, as I said, this is going to be a monologue. All of this is going to be my opinion, so it's going to be pretty biased towards myself. I would like to, poll the audience and to see what everyone thinks of the changes because I think there are lots of things that didn't even cross my mind that some people feel about the changes. I'm not going to talk about lunar cycle and sand cycle rotations. Even though that's on the horizon, NISEI will come up with new data packs to replace, to replace certain functionalities lost in those cycles. So, until that comes out, we shouldn't be too quick to judge on that. We also won't consider the most wanted list. Well, that's a separate discussion altogether. So once again, if I haven't made this clear enough, even though this is going to be a monologue, I'm going to be your only presenter. I would still love to hear from y'all in the discussion in the YouTube chat, and I will also bring up some points from the YouTube chat as and when we go along. To answer your question, Vadim, nope, I did not help playtest this. I am not affiliated with the NISEI project at all. If you've seen all the announcements that NISEI has pushed through so far, you realize that my name is not on it at all. So this is both a good and a bad thing. The bad thing is, of course, that I won't have any influence on what NISEI does, and I won't be able to provide scoops ahead of time. But I think this also puts me in a pretty unique position because now, without the affiliation with NISEI, I'm able to speak my mind and be really objective on what I feel about the changes. So, when you see me state certain things about the cards, know that it is genuine, that these are my true feelings, and I'm not saying these just to placate the NISEI people or because I have some ulterior motive. These are, going to be as objective as I can go, subject to personal bias, of course. But there you go. So hopefully that's something y'all will appreciate. All right. With all that said, we are almost on the hour. So without further ado, I think we shall begin with discussing the changes that have taken place, cards that have come in, cards that have gone out. Okay, here goes. Let's start with the runner side. This, I think, is by far the biggest change of System Core. KD Jones is back! I can't stress how excited I am for this. I was so bummed out when KD Jones did not make revised core set. I really did not see a good reason to keep certain other cards that are really, that lack the interestingness or functionality of KD Jones in the revised core set at the expense of KD Jones. And especially since people own all arts for KD Jones as well. she's a very wonderfully designed piece of economy card and one of the very, very rare economy cards in the game that provide decent drip economy that isn't just gain 1 credit or 2 credit a turn. Those cards like data folding and recurring credit cards like multi-threader, these are boring. These are just automatic cards and they all have the same trigger. At the start of your turn, you get this amount of money. Maybe you can only spend them a certain way, but that's really boring. Katie Jones is a lot more exciting, a lot more high risk, a lot more skill testing. And that's what I really appreciate about her. And, there hasn't been a suitable replacement for her, even in the latest Red Sands and Rain and Reverie cycles, which I was very disappointed by. So, yeah, this is really, really wonderful news that Katie Jones is back. I'm sure she'll be played a lot, and I think that is a good thing, right? Even though she's sustained economy and she's a strong economy card, you cannot really abuse her because you can only use Katie Jones once per turn. And that's really important. So you cannot just use her to get money for your entire turn. You need to do other stuff as well. And that's where John Masanori comes in. John Masanori is yet another one of those skill testing engine cards, right? So I believe Katie Jones and John Masanori are good examples of conditional yet consistent money cards. Conditional meaning that they have a certain condition. In Katie Jones's case, you need to use her once every turn to get maximum effect, and the money doesn't go into your bank. You have to load her up and then take the money off her before you can actually use the money. So that is a condition in itself. Same thing with John Masanori. The condition obviously meaning that you need to make a successful run. Yeah, and that is important, That is where that makes the game interesting. That skill tests the runner. How to the people. If you remember, that's the Anarch card that gives you 7 credits the first time you access an agenda that turn. That is a very swingy card. Sometimes it works, but when it doesn't, you are very, very sad. And against agenda-like decks like, 6 agenda. Enough about me swooning over these cards. Let's move on to some other neutral cards that went out. As we mentioned, Terminal Directive has rotated out, which means these following cards, neutral cards, are going out as well. Dean Lister is a big problem. If you have ever played against Armor Dean Lister at all, you know that there's something wrong with the combo. One of those cards has to go. And I think it's fair to say that Dean Lister is the bigger of the two problems. Why? Because unlike other strength raising cards, you think of Net Ready Eyes, you think of Takobi, for example, Dinosaurus, they either raise strength by very little. In the case of Net Ready Eyes' case, you only +1 strength, right? That is a very minuscule amount of strength. In the case of other cards like Dinosaurus, they have the very important limitation that you cannot use AI breakers on them. So AI breakers are kind of broken with strength raising cards because that allows you to cover a lot of ice with the AI breaker, which, if you have ever played Faust before, that's a big problem when most of your ice can be broken by AI. So Dean Lister allows you to do that with Armor Core because Dean Lister provides a huge strength boost. If you have a full hand size, that's +5 strength. That's ridiculous. Even though it's only for 1 run, that's more than enough to siege a remote and fetch an agenda. And that's nasty. So Dean Lister going is definitely good news. And I can see in chat that at least one person agrees with me. Shadownet, on the other hand, is, I think, isn't the biggest problem card per se, but I'm not sad to see it go either. I think ignoring all costs is a very dangerous design space. So Shadownet, but in that regard, allows you to, get more mileage than intended out of cards like Sure Gamble. Gaining 9 credits is kind of ridiculous from a Sure Gamble that's supposed to only give you 4 credits. But more importantly, Shadownet also is a very efficient form of recursion. And that's a big problem. Recursion is always a dangerous design space, especially since it's events, which is already covered by Same Old Thing. We already have event recursion in the form of Same Old Thing. Having Shadownet in the mix might be a bit too much. In any case, it's something that we can live without Shadownet. So, yeah, I think these changes are fine. And I'm not sad to see these cards go. Now, This is probably one of the, if not the most controversial change that is happening in System Core. Underworld Contact is going. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, what's the big deal? It's just an economy card. And then you realize, by removing Underworld Contact, Sunny is completely, utterly dead as a mini faction. Uh-oh. This is a problem, right? So, let me get this straight first. Personally, I think Sunny is very poor design. Very, very dull design. She has very boring breakers. She has a ridiculously dumb console. And, the concept of a runner having excessive link can be a balance issue because, certain trace-based NBN decks are just completely dead in the water. So it really doesn't help that, Sunny is being supported by boring drip economy cards like Data Folding and Underworld Contact. So I'm not sad to see this card go. It's a boring card, it supports a boring archetype, and I would just like to see the entire Sunny faction revamped. However, I can definitely see the people having an issue with a mini faction getting killed by NISEI just like that. It's almost to the point of being disrespectful. Imagine you are a Sunny fan, you like playing that mini faction, and all of a sudden this random leadership team says, nope, you cannot play this mini faction. I don't care how much you love it, you cannot play this mini faction. An entire mini faction just technically you can play it, sure, but Underworld Contact is such a key card to Sunny decks because how are you going to get the money to use your super expensive breakers otherwise? So this is kind of an issue. So I'm in two minds about this. While I'm personally happy that Underworld Contact is going, I can see that this is a problem, especially for people who, enjoy Sunny more or simply, play decks for theme. Like, you want to be the security specialist, or you just want to change of scenery, you want to play Sunny from time to time. Well, you can't anymore because System Core says so. So that's, I'm hoping to see that Sunny receives more support in the future, but for now, she is pretty much dead in the water. Right, now let's move on to the individual factions, starting with Anarch. Queen's Gambit is back! Okay, I'm really excited for this one as well. Almost as excited as KD Jones, for the exact same reason. It's conditional, yet consistent economy. I like Lucky Find, but I think Lucky Find's a bit too pushed. And being neutral means that, it has its problems. So Queen's Gambit is a really nice midway point because back then when Lucky Find and Queen's Gambit were both legal for play, no one ever played Queen's Gambit. You just play Lucky Find instead. But Queen's Gambit is awesome now. Now that Lucky Find is no longer here. It's also a very good form of burst economy which the game badly needs. I think a lot of runners right now struggle to deal with the threats of hard hitting news because runners' burst economy is pretty much limited to sure gamble and dirty laundry, which makes a run for you and leaves you vulnerable to hard hitting news. Queen's Gambit allows you to get money very quickly from turn 1, and it is, even though it has the condition that the Corp needs to have an unrest card on the table, most games that's going to be the case, right? Corps are going to have NGO fronts and Rashidas on the table, so this really isn't a problem. In the context of the current card pool, I think Queen's Gambit is a fine card. Whether it's competitive remains to be seen, but as far as I'm concerned, I like that this card exists. Simply as a viable alternative to something like Guinea Pig, which also gives you 6 credits, but comes at a very, very steep cost of trashing your entire hand. Right, so I love Queen's Gambit, and I'm glad that it's back. Now, Fractors. Corroder is now the new Fractor in System Core. Well, I say new, it's super old. I'm sure people have fond memories of playing with Corroder, and the good news is Corroder is back. The bad news is, with Corroder taking the Fractor slot, Morningstar is going off. So, does that change the diversity in Fractors? Maybe, I'm not so sure. I personally have a soft spot for Morningstar, so I'm a bit sad to see it go. But hey, I guess that means that, it opens up design space for big barrier breakers in the future. I think that's a big problem. The game doesn't currently do much to support big breakers, big rig, and it's not like Morningstar is the epitome of bad big breaker design. Cards like Torch can be a lot more oppressive than something like simple like a Morningstar. Right? Morningstar is still limited. It can't break high strength ice like Shiyashis or Bulwarks. So as far as I'm concerned, Morningstar is a perfectly fine breaker, being a fixed breaker and all, and I'm a bit sad to see it go. Um, I during the weekend, when I was at Charity Gift, I actually whipped out a crazy deck that played Lamb and Morningstar. That was pretty disgusting, breaking Anansi's for 3 credits. But I thoroughly enjoyed that. This is the sort of thing that Netrunner players enjoy, making cool niche decks that aren't necessarily competitive, but you can make them and you can play them because the card pool gives you that option. And having that option taken away from you with Morningstar going away is a bit of a loss, to be honest. Yep, but that's factors for the Anarch side. I think some people might be interested in why bother bringing Corroder back when Paperclip usurps it in basically every way. It's important to note that Corroder is actually better for non-Anarch factions. If you're using Special Order to fetch Corroder or Self-Modifying Code to fetch Corroder, the reduced install costs can be a very big deal in saving you credits upfront. That's quite important to note. Right, so that's Anarch. Moving on to Criminal. Hostage is back. I'm a bit ambivalent on this. On one hand, I appreciate that now a toolbox connection deck can be played. You can play things like one KD Jones and one John Masnori and not worry about consistency because you will be able to fetch both with Hostage depending on what kind of game you end up in. This is what Andromeda players used to do back in the day, and that was a nice, fair, and good use of Hostage. The problematic use with Hostage comes when you have cards, economy connections at that, that become very powerful when assembled in critical mass. I'm thinking of Tech Trader here. So yeah, not really happy to see Tech Trader Hostage becoming a thing. I think that provides it too much reliability and that makes the entire trash can archetype too good. If there's one point of consolation, however, is that the big money card for the trash can archetype in Fall Guy is now rotated out. It's no longer in System Core, so guys will no longer be able to play Fall Guy. Right. Good point. Going back to Corroder. Stefan mentioned that Corroder is less influenced than Paperclip. That's actually a very big deal, and thanks for bringing that up. Whether you're playing Criminal or something like Smoke, being able to spend one less influence on your Fractor is a very big deal. Very good shout. Right, so but back to Guy's archetype. Not having Fall Guy is probably a bigger loss than you might think, and having Fall Guy removed is also kind of good news because there's now less of an ability to abuse resource trashing prevention. I'm thinking of wireless net pavilions and pad taps. Fall Guy makes them a bit too good, and having Fall Guy out of the equation is pretty nice in my opinion. The form of tech removal in the system core has also changed. Instead of crash space, we now instead have networking. So a 1-for-1 trade there. I think this is a fine change because one of the important objectives of system core is to balance out the competitive Netrunner metagame, and in that regard, networking is more suited for the current competitive meta, which is mostly dominated by the tagging card of hard-hitting news. So hard-hitting news slaps you with 4 tags, which you kind of have to clear in the span of a single turn. Crash Space only helps you with clearing one of those tags, but networking helps you clear all 4. So that's the big difference, making networking better than Crash Space. It's a nice midway point between manually clearing tags and misdirection. So if you are a criminal faction, or if you want to only spend 1 influence instead of 2, well, networking's the card for you. So yeah, not a very big change, but a nice one to note regardless. As we mentioned, terminal directive is rotating, and that entails some criminal cards from Terminal Directive going out as well. DJ Fenris' target in Steve is going home. No more Steve Cambridge, and I think that's fine, right? Steve Cambridge was a very interesting ID, and he was good while it lasted, but I think you can see a recurring theme here, and that is that recursion cards are slowly being stamped out, and I think that's a good thing. I've always been rather wary when it comes to printing recursion cards because a critical mass of recursion results in really degenerate decks like account siphon spam. Back in the day, that was not a fun thing to deal with. Friends in high places enabling asset spam, that was really nasty. While nowadays recursion cards are more controlled and more, designed such that they cannot be easily abused, like Steve Cambridge, for example. The remove from game aspect is a pretty big deal, but at the end of the day, having one less recursion card to worry about abusing means that NISEI can design more recursion cards moving forward that are more measured in impact, and that's a good thing. As for Maxwell James, I think it is a very unique card in the sense that it is the most nerfed card in the history of Netrunner that didn't even make it on the most wanted list. It was first printed, it was busted immediately, everyone was playing it to de-res remote ice. Then suddenly the rules change came in, now you can only de-res ice, you cannot de-res ice mid-run, and now why not just remove the card altogether? It's a lot more elegant than having functional errata, right? Functional errata are pretty awful because people read cards when you are playing in meat space, and having a card that does one thing but reads another way is kind of a problem. So, rather than having to deal with this complication, why not just remove Maxwell James from the card pool entirely? We take those. We definitely take those. Right? So that's criminal. Let's move on to Shaper. This is a very huge change. We are trading 1-for-1 these R&D pressure cards. No more indexing, but R&D interface heralds back in. I'm fairly skeptical of this change. Now, indexing, in my opinion, was a rather nice design because it provided you with R&D access, but in a very unique manner, right? Instead of just accessing more cards, there's so many cards that do this already. Maker's Eye, Deep Data Mining, Exa, and now R&D interface. But indexing provides you with R&D pressure in a very different way, and in a cool way, in my opinion, because it allows you to avoid accesses, so giving you an inherent protection against ambushes like Snare. But yet coming with the subtle drawback of requiring 2 runs. You need to be able to make 2 runs on that server in the same turn in order to fetch the agendas that you index. So I think that's really cool, and I'm a bit sad to see that that's going. On the flip side, R&D interface is not a card that I really enjoyed while it was in the card pool. I think inevitable R&D lock is not a fun aspect of the game. It may as well to some extent be Corp playing against a prison runner, where the runner just imprisons the Corp by accessing R&D every time there's fresh cards on top. Although I guess there are some changes between back then and now that make R&DI more balanced. For one, ice is actually relevant again. If you think about the past, there were lots of breakers that were too strong. Breakers were stronger than ice back in the past. Faust was too good, Parasite was too good, and Blackmail was too good. So that made R&DI locks too easy. Also, people were more worried about medium than R&D interface, to be fair. Nowadays, things have reversed. Now ice are on top and breakers are struggling, right? Runners' economy are not that good, and now there are a lot more bulky Corp eyes like Fairchild 3, DNA Tracker, Anansi, the list goes on. So it's not that easy to maintain R&D lock, and with the faster paced nature of the game, because Jackson Howard no longer exists and Prison Decks no longer exist, Corps are kind of incentivized to play faster. So games typically end faster, which means that R&DI doesn't reach its peak potential. So in the competitive sense, I think R&DI might be okay. That's the only thing that's keeping me, skeptical instead of dismissing this outright as a bad change, because honestly, I did not like R&D interface back then. I was happy to see it go in revised core. Now that it's in system core, I'll have to adopt a wait and see approach to see whether before I can make further judgment on R&D interface. Deus Ex. This is a very exciting breaker. This is also a very exciting form of net damage defense because unlike existing net damage defenses like Caldera, like feedback filter, Deus Ex is single use and it prevents any amount of damage. So that's really cool. It can't be repeatedly used to auto win against net damage based decks. Yet it gives you the protection needed and doubles up as a nice breaker as well. However, I think I would rather have seen Deus Ex go in a vacuum, in a nutshell. By itself, Deus Ex is a fine card and it's wonderful and I like to see it in the card pool. But when you consider that cards like Adjusted Matrix and Panchatantra still exist, that's where my problem is. Because I think not that many people are going to play Deus Ex as a support breaker like people used to in the past with Prepaid Kate. More than likely, people will be looking to abuse Deus Ex with cards like Adjusted Matrix and Panchatantra. And I'm not looking forward to playing with those against those kind of decks. So yeah. I guess Adjusted Matrix is not that bad because there's so many multi-subroutine ice out there nowadays and E3 feedback implants is no longer a thing, so I guess that's okay. And yeah, I guess. We'll just have to wait and see. But in terms of the card itself, I think Deus Ex adds some value to the game, but I'm also rather cautious that it also adds some, less desirable aspects back into the game. Next up, we have Scavenge and Sacrificial Construct. Okay, so both these cards are not present in System Core. Sacrificial Construct is out of the window. Scavenge, on the other hand, is in Creation and Control. So we will still see Scavenge in the meta, but it could go in the future when big box rotation comes about. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, a recurring theme here, as if I haven't mentioned this enough, is that recursion is being stamped out. And I think that's pretty cool. Although Scavenge, I think, is a pretty fair and nice recursion card to have, I'm a bit sad to see it go because I think a lot of people enjoyed having Scavenge around to boost the use of limited use breakers like David, like the Dog Breakers, for example. I think Scavenge is very interesting. It also combos nicely with Test Run. It's going to be really awkward playing Test Run without Scavenge in System Core moving forward, but that is how it is. So, personally, I would rather have seen Scavenge stay in the card pool, but even if it goes, I guess it's not the biggest loss to the game. Sacrificial Construct, on the other hand, really, really needs to go. I don't like this card at all, and this has caused more problems than creating solutions, right? The only real solution it has created is to create a very polarizing matchup versus Scorpios, where you auto-win if you're SACCON and you auto-lose if you don't have it. That's no longer needed because, spoiler alert, Scorpios is going out. But in all other regards, Sacrificial Construct sucks because it limits the design space of Trash on Purge viruses. Tapworm was banned, not because by itself it's too strong, because if you think about it, while Tapworm is a very strong economy card, having the potential to give you multiple credits every turn, it was offset by the fact that the Corp could purge it. However, with Sacrificial Construct, the cost of purging was just too high to justify, and that's why Tapworm got banned. And this is a big problem because this means that, Trash on Purge viruses like Tapworm just cannot exist when Sacrificial Construct does. Now that Sacrificial Construct's out of the window, we can possibly design more interesting Trash on Purge viruses that are more pushed in power level, and I think that's a good thing. I'm fine with Tapworm still staying on the most wanted list though, because clone chip is still a thing. So that's something to keep in mind. Right, moving on to the Shaper archetype in Terminal Directive. If you remember, Terminal Directive pushed the Wise Beings suite, Shaper archetype that consumes very little memory, that has a lot of free memory, I should say, so that breakers like Savant have very high base strength. And then using the free memory, you use cards like data folding to get lots of economy, and finally deep data mining to get ridiculous multi-access. All these cards gone. No more Savant, no more Deck Deer, no more Deep Data Mining, right? Not that people were really playing it anyways. The only person I've really seen playing these breakers are myself and Timmy Wong, so I guess that's fine. Deck Deer leaving kind of sucks. I think a lot of people love Deck Deer, and it was a kind of a staple in Pawn Shop Haley. Being able to install cash for 1 credit instead of 0 is really nice. And, being able to host 2 memory programs like Ngolo, like Lamb on Deck Deer is a really nice bonus. But it's not like there aren't alternatives in the card pool. Akamatsu Memtrip for one is coming back, and there's also Leprechaun that's still in the card pool. So I think this is not the biggest loss. So that's why I think it's okay that these are going. It's time to see some fresh Shaper designs, and old Shaper designs can go, kind of. Yeah. Also, Quagos brings up a very good point here. Yes, I really should have mentioned this, but Deck Deer, while being a cool card, does create a limit in terms of not being able to print cards that cost even more memory. That's a very good point. So if you think about it, one of the biggest drawbacks of printing of a card like Hyperdriver, which is a very efficient card, is that it costs 3 memory. So while you have Hyperdriver out, you can't really have a full Breaker Suite out. Deck Deer just rids Hyperdriver of that limitation too easily. So that's a very good point. With Deck Deer out of the way, moving forward, it will be easier to design 3 and 4 memory programs and have those memory count as a significant drawback instead of making Deck Deer a very simple solution, or rather I should say auto-include with said high memory programs. Yep, very good point, Quark. Okay, as I mentioned, Akamatsu chip is coming back. Not much to say about that. I really appreciate that a cheap memory option is coming back because there wasn't any before System Core, right? If you wanted to extend your memory, were in the Anarch or Criminal faction, you were kind of shit out of luck because most of the memory cards were consoles, which you could only run 1 copy of. In Shaper faction, at least you could run Cyberdelia, but that's prohibitively expensive in terms of influence for Anarch and Criminal. For reference, I was trying to build a Lamb Morningstar deck. I think I mentioned this earlier, and I was kind of sad because I was basically forced to play more as my console because I badly needed that 2 memory. There were no other viable memory cards in the card pool for me to use in Max. So having Akamatsu Memchip as a cheap option in terms of cost and influence is welcome for respite for deck builders like myself. So I'm happy. Even though this is a very unassuming and low power level card, I'm happy that it exists. Right, more terminal directive cards. Ayla and Laguna are out the window, and I think that's fine because these cards are best used in combo Shaper decks that typically try to win in one big turn. I'm thinking of Apocalypse Ayla, Encore Ayla, and all those nasty shenanigans. I don't think that's the kind of archetype that the game should be encouraging. Netrunner is not a game where you play solitaire, you draw your entire deck, and then try to combo out in one single turn. I think that defeats the entire point of playing the game. You should go play something like Magic the Gathering if you want to do that. If you want to play fun, good Netrunner, there are other Shaper IDs available for you. There are other Shaper card draw options available for you. These are just only worth... I wouldn't say they're only worth... These... the presence of Ayla and Laguna make it a bit that much easier for combo decks to exist, and that's a problem. And because of that, I think it's fine that these cards go away. So, yeah, again, we are not short of options in the card pool, even though Ayla has a unique NVRAM effect and Laguna is a strong draw card that will be missed. Ultimately, there are still other options in the card pool, so this is something I wouldn't worry too much about. Finally, this is probably going to be one of the most striking changes for some, especially for veteran players. Magnum Opus is gone, right? It happened in September. It's now history. Magnum Opus is a card that I've hated for a very long time, and with good reason. It promotes runner decks with boring gameplay. Its ability is just inviting competitive players to mash and mash and mash, taking 8 credits for days on end, 10 credits if you have Beth Karain Chang out. And that's just not fun Netrunner, right? Instead of encouraging interesting economy options like Katie Jones, where you can only get so much money every turn. Magnum Opus just says, well, here's a lot of money. Go ham on the remotes. And, you know, that creates boring gameplay. It's the same reason why I detest Sunny as dull design, because she has dull design. Same thing, Magnum Opus is dull design, it's very lazy design. I mean, it was justifiable when Netrunner was in its infancy, but now that the game has matured, I think it's a good time to send it out the door. Ultimately, I think conditional and skill testing economy and card draw cards like John Masnori, Queen's Gambit, and Katie Jones should be more rewarding than, boring vanilla cards like Magnum Opus. So Magnum Opus is a bit too strong. If it were printed as, something like click, gain 3 credits, I think it would still stay in the game. But as far as Magnum Opus is concerned, it's too powerful as a vanilla card to justify keeping in the game. So, yeah. Also a good point brought up by Vadim. ESOPs is honestly so much more fun as an economy engine. I completely agree. Even ESOPs is more fun than Magnum Opus. So yeah, these fun economy cards should reward the runner more than playing Magnum Opus. The only way to do that is to either boost those fun economy cards so you end up getting power creep with cards like Temujin, or you remove Magnum Opus. And I think I prefer removing Magnum Opus to encouraging power creep. Temujin doesn't really need to exist. Alright, let's move on. Glad to hear from the chat that some people are agreeing with me on Magnum Opus. I think there's some resentment from more veteran players who, are attached to the concept of Magnum Opus being the core shaper experience. To me, I think professional context is a good midway point between Magnum Opus and clicking for credits. And yes, as it turns out, professional context is in the system core. So, I think again, the designers of NISEI have done a very good job in, striking a midway point that, encourages and rewards good gameplay, whilst at the same time appeasing those who miss the core shaper experience. Okay. We're at halftime. I think we are about half an hour through this video, and that's pretty good time. So, I know some of you viewers have just joined us, so I'll do a quick recap of what we are doing in this video. System Core has come out. What is System Core? System Core is the new core set designed by the NISEI project, Project NISEI, which is the team that is taking over Netrunner's design moving forward now that FFG has dropped the Netrunner license. System Core was created for a bunch of reasons. You can scroll back in the video to find out why. But basically what this means for us is that the revised core set is out the door, and along with it, terminal directive. I think an important reason for rotating out terminal directive, besides all the things I've mentioned so far with the runner cards, is that terminal directive imbalances the number of cards in each faction. If you remember, terminal directive was created with only criminal, shaper, HB, and Wayland cards. This is not really fair to the Anarch, NBN, and Jinteki factions. So by rotating terminal directive out, now each faction will have roughly the same number of cards, and that I think is quite important. So I think this is another really good reason to rotate terminal directive out, and I'm very happy that NISEI has taken this step. So what we're going to do is to discuss all those cards that are rotating out and those cards that are coming back in from the Genesis, Spin, and old core set into System Core. I won't be covering all the cards, but I'll just be highlighting the important ones. Yeah. So once again, I'm not affiliated with NISEI in any way. So this means that I can provide a more objective analysis of the changes in System Core without worrying about potential ramifications or having some ulterior motive. So yep, we've already covered the runner half of the System Core changes. Let's move on to the Corp half right now. After I take a drink of water, of course. Alright, so Corp side. So let's start with HB. Woo! Yes! Oh, I'm so happy to throw these cards in the bin and burn them forever. Estelle Moon, I hate you. I hate you so much. Oh man, when Moon's HB decks were a thing, wow, that was one of the most unpleasant experiences I had playing competitive Netrunner. I don't understand how people can have fun playing Estelle Moon. She's just awful. I mean, you love asset spam that much, don't you? Yeah, glad to see that go. And Brain Rewiring, another Scrooge of the meta. Scourge of the meta, I should say. Making kill decks very unfair and enabling combo decks like never before. I have no idea why this card was designed. This was very, very poorly thought out, and the only good remedy really is to just rotate these cards out altogether. Sure, you could put them on the most wanted list, but they'll just be bloating up the most wanted list. Again, this is another good reason why terminal directives should be rotated. Of course, there's going to be crossfire, cards caught in the crossfire, of course, but NISEI has already saved some of them in System Core, so I think it's not a big deal. So yeah, very glad these combo-based cards are gone. Again, I think Netrunner at its core should not be about playing combo-based decks that have huge giant turns that completely alter the board state. So yeah, these cards really need to go. Clearances. There has been a very, very huge change in the legality of clearances. Previously, all the clearances but blue level were legal. Now it's the other way around. All the clearances except blue level clearance are gone. Ultraviolet and black level clearance are gone because they're in terminal directive. Green level clearance is gone because it was in the revised core set and no longer in system core. Instead, in system core, we are bringing back blue level clearance. I like this change, at least in terms of the lower level clearances. I think green level clearance is kind of underpowered, especially nowadays where cards like IPO exist, where NGO Front exists, even Rashida exists. So yeah, there's very little reason to play green level clearance. Blue level, on the other hand, is more interesting because while it's about as inefficient as green level, if not more so, the fact that it packs more punch into the same card is a big deal, right? It means that you have a better economy card and a better draw card that way. I still don't expect people to play this too often, given that Rashida exists, but given that there are no other clearances left, if you want a clearance, I think blue level is a nice midway point between being too weak, like green level clearance, or being, too much, as is the case with ultraviolet or violet level clearance. Speaking of which, violet level clearance is not on this slide. It's still where it used to belong, that is to say, on the most wanted list. Ultraviolet level clearance is ultraviolet clearance going, it's okay, I guess. I think the fact that we have violet level clearance as a card already in the card pool is enough to justify rotating ultraviolet out. We don't need two forms of violet clearances. One is good enough. As for black level clearance, I think it promotes an interesting archetype. Brain damage HB. Everyone loves brain damage HB. No, but seriously, I don't see why it should go. But I guess I don't know. I think it was pretty interesting, right? As it stands, HB has very few defensive upgrades as is, and taking away another one of their defensive upgrades isn't really helping the faction at all. So for that reason, I think black level clearance should stay, but hopefully they're gonna print more good HB upgrades, I guess, in the future. Not much else to say about that. Rotage, you never played black level clearance? Lies. Okay, moving on. This is probably the biggest change for the HB faction. Eli 1.0 is back. Apparently people missed it so much that, or maybe a lot of people on the design team just wanted to use that Eli 1.0 all arts. Whatever the case is, Eli is back, and it's here to stay because it's in the system core. So in my opinion, if you ask me what is the best ice ever printed, without hesitation, without a doubt, I would say it's Eli 1.0. There was some really good ice that we met along the way, like Toll Booth. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, no ice was as ubiquitous, no ice was splashed as prevalently as Eli 1.0 was, right? It was very much undercosted at the time it was printed. Eli was a good notch above the other barriers in terms of power level back then. It was also dirt cheap in terms of influence, meaning that you would see it in basically every other faction as well. RP Glacier, Jinteki Glacier, yes, run 3 copies of Eli. Fast Biotics, Fast Advanced NBN, sure, why not? It's only 1 influence. NEH has 17 influence. Let's splash some Elis. So Eli basically became a neutral card that cost 1 influence simply because it was seen basically everywhere. It was that good, right? Have things changed? Not really, if you ask me. If you look at it, while better and better barrier breakers have been printed since then, most of them still break Eli for roughly the same amount, right? Paperclip breaks Eli for 3 credits, which is still not very cheap, right? I will be happy to rest an Eli against a paperclip that breaks it for 3 credits. Yusuf requires 3 virus counters. That is a fair bit for an Eli that costs 3 to rest once more. Really, the only good breaker against Eli 1.0 is Cerberus Lady, and that's getting rotated soon. And of course, Morningstar, but that's gone. So, Eli is as difficult to break as it was in the past, right? Barrier breakers haven't really crept in power level, so Eli is still going to be a big problem. And because of that, you should expect to see a lot of Eli running about moving forward. However, having thought about it, I realized that Eli is not, isn't bad design. If a card is being played in almost every deck, you start to think that is possibly bad design, and that may have been the case with Eli. Its power level might have been too high. But I thought about it some more, and then I realized that in the current context of things, it's not the factors that I should be looking at, but rather it's the barriers that are in on the Corp side that I should be looking at. And in terms of Corp barriers, there's so many good Corp barriers right now, right? In NBN, you see Resistant and IP Block being viable, as well as Endless Euler for the more Glacier-based decks. In Jinteki, you have everything from Kakugo, which has a unique on-pass effect, to Chiashi, which is just this gigantic Corp blocking barrier. And you also have the zero-cost Vanilla that always has a niche design space on its own. So, Eli is competing with these barriers. This is the big difference between Eli back then and Eli now. Back then, there were no good barriers. Eli 1.0 was competing with what? Wall of Static? Bastion? Those were shit barriers. So, that was why not only were people playing Eli everywhere, people were playing Eli as their only barrier because the other barriers were shit. But now that that's not the case, we don't have to worry about Eli dominating the barrier design space because there are still reasons for Corps to run other barriers besides Eli. And as long as the diversity is there, I think it's fine. So if anything, I think HB is the one faction that needs the boost in barriers because they just don't have any good barriers. Eli 2.0 is crap. Seder Adaptive Barrier is just not as good as Surveyor, So, having Eli 1.0 back is a very welcome respite for HB, which badly needs a good barrier of their own. To address Haradan, wasn't Eli mostly out of the meta in terms of splashing after Paperclip came out? I don't think so. 3 credits to break Eli is still fairly expensive. Why did Eli go away? So pre-rotate... I don't think Eli really went away, if you ask me. I think if anything, people were just spending their influence on non-ice cards. I think that's the bigger reason. I think people realized that influence was more worth spending on win conditions. So, if I were to build an NBN deck, for example, I would rather spend my influence on a win condition like meat damage kill, right? I would rather import Boom into my deck rather than to play Eli for extra defense. Eli would be nice in my 24/7 sync deck, don't get me wrong, but I would rather have my influence on ensuring that I get the kill, right? If you think of other decks from that era like CTM, you would rather spend your influence on money cards and defensive agendas. Global food initiative means that most decks have 3 less influence to spend. Jackson Howard means that there's 3 influence less to spend. So people rather spend their influence on cards that win them the game rather than Ice, which was less relevant because, let's face it, Ice was very easy to break at that point in time. People were running, Dumblefork was a thing. People were running Temujin, which basically makes Ice very bad, and so on and so forth. So yeah, Eli 1.0 was strong, even in the later days of pre-rotation. It's just that people found it much more worth it to spend the influence elsewhere. Okay, so that's Eli 1.0 done. Agendas. This I'm not happy with. I think it's a mistake to keep successful field tests, which is HB's agenda in System Core, at the cost of elective upgrade. What good does successful field tests do to the meta? I can't, it's beyond me. I don't see it. The only time people ever played successful field tests in a competitive setting is in stupid dumb combo moon stacks, right? Why are you encouraging that? Granted, you can no longer do that because CI is banned, moons is no longer a thing, so that's fine. But I still don't see, if anything, that leaves you with less reason to keep successful field tests. It's not like people were playing SFT because for value, for installing their 1 of 2 cards from their HQ. It just doesn't make sense because there's already a card that does that in the current card pool. It's called Team Sponsorship. Team Sponsorship does the exact same thing that successful field test does on the exact same trigger without requiring you to spend the agenda slot. You can spend your agenda slots on better things. So it just boggles me why we need successful field tests in the card pool. It doesn't add anything novel. It doesn't value add anything to the meta. If anything, it's just a piece of dead weight that is in System Core for the sake of being a 4-2 HB agenda in System Core. And I think that's, while I see, I don't see it. To me, it just doesn't make sense. I don't like successful field tests at all, and this was a perfect time to rotate it out. Why we are keeping it is beyond me. Instead, we are sacrificing a valuable agenda in elective upgrade. I know it doesn't see play competitively, but this was the very first 5-3 design that was of a sufficient power level to justify running 5-3s where you want to actively score them, right? In the past, for the most part, 5-3 agendas are only playable if they are defensive or if they have an on-steal effect like SSL endorsement. Elective upgrade changed that. Elective upgrade was pushed to the point where people can start justifying running this 5-3 agenda for its effect, for its on-score effect. So, it's a wonderful agenda that immediately puts the pressure on the runner because now they have to start hammering centrals, otherwise the Corp can potentially win on fast advance. And that's a good thing. If the Corp managed to score a 5-3 agenda that's as squishy as elective upgrade, they deserve that effect. So removing this powerful 5-3 effect from the HP faction is a big loss in my opinion. You can no longer do that. Given that System Core was meant to prepare the card pool for the competitive meta moving forward, I'm really dissatisfied with losing elective upgrade because it really is one of the very few 5-3 agendas that encourage you squishy 5-3 agendas that had a strong on-score effect. Now reading the chat. Vadim says, I think the reason they kept SFT was because it's a 4-2 and it's better in a core experience. I don't know what you mean by better in a core experience. I agree that it's more consistent with the other factions, right? Jinteki got Nisei Mark 2, NBN got Exploder Palooza, Wayland got Oaktown. So HB should have their own 4-2 as well, but there are ways to jiggle the agenda points around without resorting to just cutting elective upgrade out of the card pool. I think this is a loss, and I think it's a loss for no good reason. I think I really don't. I mean, I get that was the reason. I've been told that the reason was because to maintain consistency and for the system core experience, but there's nothing wrong with scoring a 5-3 in system core. So yeah, well, it just flummoxes me. So not gonna be not even though this card doesn't affect me personally because I don't play elective upgrade all that much, I am still rather miffed by the decision. But we'll bury that hatchet and move on because we have some Jinteki cards to talk about. Fetal AI, or should I say Fatal AI, is now back. Now, I love this choice. I'm very excited, and I love that NISEI is bringing back one of these all-time favorites. NISEI, Fetal AI was always a fun agenda, and, the contorted faces of agony when your opponent accesses one of your Fetal AIs is one of the best feelings ever. However, again, it's important to note that System Core is meant to be a primer for the competitive card pool moving forward, and I think there might be some complications with Fetal AI existing in the same time frame as Obokata Protocol and Potatoes Unleashed. This is a problem, right? If you notice so far, there are only so many defensive agendas for a very good reason. If you give Wayland, for example, too many defensive agendas, then Gagarin Prison becomes a thing. If you give NBN too many defensive agendas, then CTM Prism becomes a thing. And here we are with Jinteki, and that's happening. I mean, I'm not going to cry about the sky falling right now, but having two different agendas that require you to take net damage before stealing them is a bit of a problem. Okay, I know Fetal AI doesn't require you to take net damage per se. You can actually avoid the net damage and still steal Fetal AI, unlike Obokata. But my point still stands. Without any net damage protection, I think a deck with Obokatas and Fetal AIs can be really nasty to play with. You have to take so much net damage in order to get to 7 agenda points. Not really good in my opinion. I would like to see how the designers deal with this moving forward. I do know that both Obokata and Potatoes Unleashed are restricted, but you can still play either of those with Fetal AI, and that could lead to some decks where their only objective is to mill out the runner, right? So yeah, my apprehension is there. Even though I'm excited for this agenda, I'm apprehensive about the effect that it might have on the competitive scene. Okay. Yeah. Let's move on. RP is back. Okay, so I'm personally not as excited about RP being back as some people. I know some people who personally really enjoy RP. I know some people who live and breathe RP day and night. Heinzo. But yeah, I think it's nice to have another alternative for Jinteki Glacier. Because having Umti when Kundu isn't enough. Because having Egg Infusion isn't enough. Because having Palana isn't enough. Why not have another Jinteki ID that does Glacier? Woohoo! Okay, sarcasm aside. I think Jinteki RP is a nice addition, considering that Industrial Genomics is going out of the window. Because of that, there's no longer any Jinteki ID that encourages asset-based play. So RP is something that is welcome for asset-based Jinteki to thrive, because otherwise you can't really play most Jinteki assets anymore. Now I know this is a contentious issue because I've been harping on the fact that asset spam is not a good aspect of the game. Whether that becomes the case remains to be seen. Yeah, I can definitely see RP getting out of hand if too many good assets are printed, right? Ever since RP rotated, we've seen more and more interesting, and by interesting I mean powerful Jinteki assets. Daily Business Show is still around as well, so a lot of good reasons to play RP now. It's now a breeding ground for very good decks, especially now that its main economy, persistent economy card in Sundew has rotated back in as well. So yeah, yeah. Reading some of the comments, Rotich mentions he'd be much happier playing against RP asset spam than IG asset spam. I kind of agree. On the other hand, I remember there was a time where there was some 54 card prison RP deck. That wasn't very fun. Again, um, I'm starting to imagine an RP deck that runs both Obo Carter and Fetal AI, and goes with some sort of attrition-based strategy. You know, if you put a bunch of breach domes in archives, suddenly, well, okay, you don't have to make successful runs to turn off RP, but you know, I think people will eventually find a way to abuse Jinteki having some really good cards, strong ice, strong self-defending agendas, and and strong ID abilities. Mti Wakundu, Agent Fusion are both very strong IDs, and RP is equally as strong as well. So yeah, those decks aren't very fun to play against. We'll see if people manage to make them work to the point of being NPE. Let's see what other comments are there. Yeah, RP being back is both exciting and terrifying. Yes, I think that is probably where my feelings are on RP. I'm approaching it with some cautious pessimism. I think it's interesting. I think it'll provide an alternative dimension to the game. You know, making Jinteki assets unplayable. Making assets unplayable in Jinteki isn't exactly good design either. But RP might be pushing it a bit too much. Forcing the runner to lose clicks every turn to RP's ability is kind of a big deal. Tomasaki mentions RP makes Nisei Mark II a much better agenda. I agree. But in the same vein, Agent Fusion does exactly the same thing, right? If anything, Agent Fusion does it better because it forces the runner through the remote ice twice rather than forcing through the weaker central server followed by the remote. So yeah, if you are looking to abuse Nisei Mark II, I still think Agent Fusion is the better ID, not to mention that it also has 2 extra influence to play around with. Vadim mentions that MT is already better at the horizontal game. I think MT in general is just a very nice all-rounder ID. It can handle both asset-based play and vertical-based play. And that's kind of the reason why it's, spoiler alert, on the most wanted list now. So yeah, I think that adds a very interesting deck building choice in the Jinteki faction. You can spend your restricted slot on Mti Wakundu, so that you have a very powerful ID ability that can do a lot of things. Or you can take one of these so-called less powerful Jinteki IDs in RP or Agent Fusion and have a restricted card to go along with it. To address Porgos's sentiment, I'm not sure that MT is as good for pure horizontal as RP would be. Have you seen that political dealings deck? I think it's still better in MT than RP because MT defends centrals in a way that RP doesn't. I think that's a very big deal. You have to remember that MT is just such a good all-rounder because it defends centrals as well. RP does not defend centrals. You have to defend centrals on your own. So that's quite important. Yeah, at the end of the day, the Jinteki IDs are basically all very powerful. At least those on the competitive end of the spectrum. So having RP as an additional one to the mix is kind of okay, because it's not like it's going to dominate the entire Jinteki ID design space. It's not like everyone's going to flock to RP now that it's a thing, because, you know, the alternatives are still equally as powerful, or they provide a different niche. If I'm playing vertical, I probably want to play Agent Fusion instead of RP instead. And that leads to a healthy meta game, where you can go to a tournament, you play against 3 different Jinteki decks, and they're all different IDs and still competitive. That is good in my opinion. So, well, we'll see how this goes. I'm, again, cautiously pessimistic, but I'm excited for what the future might bring with this. Tsurugi is back. I was initially very, very excited for this. Tsurugi has never been more powerful, because the biggest bane of Tsurugi in the past has been Parasite. Parasite just makes very short work of Tsurugi and makes you regret your ice choices immediately. However, now that Parasite's not in the card pool, Tsurugi can shine. Most Sentry Breakers have to pay 4 credits to get past Tsurugi, and more importantly, it is also one of those very few sentries that actually ends the run. I think this is something the game is really lacking, and having Tsurugi back to fill up this niche is a very nice, welcome presence, right? Even though it's pretty expensive to res. The biggest issue with Tsurugi is that now that time has gone on, don't forget this was printed way back in Spin Cycle. Tsurugi, I mean, Jinteki sentries, and especially Jinteki sentries, have seen a huge power surge, right? A Nancy was printed, Lindsay was printed. All these Jinteki sentries are very competitive. It's very hard for Tsurugi to usurp these Jinteki Ice because, you know, all you need to do is pay a couple more credits to Tsurugi's res cost and you can get an ice that has 5 strength. That's a big deal. So because of that, I think Tsurugi might not see as much play as I was expecting. Even though its natural counter no longer exists, I think most people would still rather play Anansi than Tsurugi. I might be wrong though. We have to wait and see. NBN! Jackson Howard is back! Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this day for... No, just kidding. Nope, we're not getting Jackson back. Let's move on. Mark the Counts is back. Well, it's a pretty awful card, especially now that there are so many better econ options, so I don't really expect this card to see much play. But I guess it's an alternative to Pack Campaign, I guess. More trash cost, lower to res. I guess. Not much else to say about this, and the only reason why this slide is here is because that's basically the only NBN card I'm going to talk about. Since it's not on Terminal Directive, there's really not much to talk about in terms of NBN. Core NBN hasn't really changed. System Core basically ported mostly the same cards from Revised Core set, right? The Ice, Pop-Up Window, Wraparound, Towu, Flare, all of those. Data Raven, those are still here. Tag and Tag Punishment, Close Account, Psychographics, Seesaws, mostly the same. So yeah. Next, let's talk about Wayland. Let's get this out of the window. Scorpios is gone. And I know that from the previous Most Wanted list video that I did, Scorpios going on the Most Wanted list actually hurt a lot more people than I initially anticipated. Some people were really not happy about Rig Shooter being taken out of the equation, and this is the final nail in the coffin for Rig Shooter. Give me a sec. So, well, firstly, I'm very happy that I managed to troll so many people with Jackson Howard. You are awesome. Okay, but back to serious business. Scorpios, Rig Shooter is something that needs to be re-evaluated, and by that I mean we need to take this out, get Scorpios and Hunter Seeker out of the way, and re-look at how Rig Shooter can be redesigned such that it is an interesting and dynamic archetype. So what I'm getting at this is that Rig Shooter used to be fun. Back then in the days of super modernism, there were cards like Archer, Power Shutdown, and yeah, those provided very interesting rig shooting options. Power Shutdown obviously being limited, you can only rig shoot cheap programs. Expensive programs are out of reach of Power Shutdown. And as for Archer, Ice back then was kind of more relevant. Itchy and Archer were not that easy to break. Sentry breakers were pretty crap back then. So, Rig Shooter was actually a real possibility back then. It was further improved when the Grail Ice came out in the Lunar Cycle, right? Now, Trash Program subroutines can fire from any subtype of ice, not just sentries. So, that was when Rig Shooter was at its finest. When most of the rig shooting came from ice, that was actually relevant. People were face checking into Trash Program subroutines and getting punished for it, but it wasn't the end of the world. It's not like they were completely locked out, and on the off chance that they only have themselves to blame, because maybe they only packed one of a certain breaker, maybe because they let too many Trash Program subroutines fire, which is their fault. So, it felt like the runner could lose a Rig Shooter game and at the end of the day say, that was a good game. Even though I got locked out, it was all my own fault because I ran into these ice and I wasn't prepared enough. So that was when Rig Shooter was at its finest in my opinion. The design of Scorpios as Rig Shooter has pushed rig shooting to a completely different arena, one that is a lot less fun for the runner. right? Because we are in a state where most of the rig shooting is not actually done by ice. So it removes the agency from the runner. Now the runner cannot say, I lost because I made bad decisions. The runner can only shrug their shoulders and raise their hands and say, I lost because your deck beats mine. And that's not a very satisfying feeling. And I think, because of that, I think rig shooter really needs to be looked at again. The other problem with rig shooter decks, and especially Scorpio's Hunter Seeker, is that the matchup becomes the outcome becomes highly matchup dependent. And that's a problem, right? I've mentioned this before as a problem when I chatted with Greg Tung, the lead designer of NISEI, when I was talking about Liza versus high profile target, right? Tag me versus tag punishment decks being super polar. That is something that's not good for the game because it takes away the game from the game. It's just, let's compare our decks. You're running high profile target and I'm tag me. I guess I lose. That's not fun. Same thing with rig shooter. If I'm running sacrificial construct, I guess I auto win. If I'm not, I guess I auto lose. That's not cool. Okay? So by removing such powerful cards from the card pool, it does two things. Firstly, rig shooter is no longer viable in the current meta, and that is a pity. But I'm hoping that in the future, rig shooter will be revisited in a way that is more positive play experience for both the Corp and the runner. Secondly, I'm hoping that I've lost my train of thought there, so sorry about that. But yeah, I think that's the main thing that I want to see. I would hope that this is not the designers saying we don't like rig shooter as an archetype, we're going to remove it from the game altogether and not revisit it anymore. I hope they revisit it in the future, hopefully make Destroyer Ice more relevant, and provide a more fun experience for rig shooter based decks. To end off, I think my biggest beef with the design of Scorpios, and I think this is one sentiment that is shared by a lot of competitive players, is that Scorpios has this remove from game clause, and I think remove from game really shouldn't be used as a win condition mechanic. So remove from game is a very specific mechanic that is fine when used to control the power level of certain cards. For example, recursion cards. If labor rights allow you to if labor rights allows you to recur other labor rights indefinitely, it can lead to some really nasty outcomes. So this is why labor rights removes itself from the game. Levy AR Lab Access, same thing. If you could, recur your deck infinite times, that's not good for the game either. You don't want the game going on forever. So remove Levy from the game when it's used. That's perfectly fine. This is how remove from game, or RFG, should be used as a mechanic to control recursion cards. RFG should not be exploited to make rig shooter more powerful. This is wrong. This is very bad design because it leads you down the rabbit hole where you start printing counter cards to this super powerful archetype. Can you imagine if NISEI starts printing cards that brings cards from RFG zone back into the game? That's just dumb. That's stupid, right? Then do we need an RFG from RFG zone so that you cannot put cards from the RFG zone back into... You see where I'm getting with this, right? You can go down an endless rabbit hole once you start introducing new zones in the game and exiling cards into those zones. There is a reason why this game has an archives and a heap. That is where your trashed cards, where your discard pile is meant to be. There is no need to have a super discard pile in the form of an RFG zone, and Scorpios just violates that design principle, which is why I'm really not a fan of Scorpios' design, and it's why I'm happy to see it go. So, a good point to bring up by Quaggles was the only reason Scorp had to exist was because of the power level of the Heat Breakers. That is definitely true. But I think that's more of a design problem with the Heat Breakers themselves more than anything else. I think a good way to design it is such that Heat Breakers cost more to install from the bin than they do from your hand. That way, rig shooting can become a tempo play against decks with Heat Breakers, right? While you cannot stop them from reinstalling their Heat Breakers, at least make them pay say, double the price for doing so. Imagine paperclip costs 8 credits to install from the bin instead of 4. That would be interesting, I think. So currently that, isn't possible because Scorpios is in the game. Scorpio says, nope, you don't send paperclip into your bin. Send it straight to Exile Land. And, we need to remove that in order to design better rig shooter cards that promote a better rig shooting experience. A better rig shooting experience, huh? Okay, that's questionable. But yeah, hopefully in time, the bin breakers will also be curated. Spoiler alert, paperclip is now on the most wanted list, so I guess that's one step in the right direction. Rotage says, I like the idea that if heat breakers are trashed by the Corp, then they get removed from the game. No, Rotage, that's not how it works. No. But yeah, that's really funny. Yeah. Okay. So, yep. Hopefully you all agree with my sentiment, because I think rig shooting ultimately is a nice additional dimension to have in the world of Netrunner. It's just a pity that, we have this arms race, where cards were designed to power creep on top of each other because of certain design mistakes that occurred earlier. It's like how assets and upgrades nowadays have super high trash costs because Wizard was a thing back then. Same thing, because now heat breakers were designed, that's why they designed Scorpios to remove breakers from the bin, which, leads to unhealthy arms race. So instead of continuing on this arms race, I'm happy that Team NISEI decided to just put an end to this altogether by cutting the arms race at a certain point, and I think Scorpios is a fine place to cut this at. Okay, let's move on. Enough talk about Scorpios. Standoff is gone. I think Standoff is an okay agenda. It was okay design. I think the biggest problem with Standoff is that it exists in a faction that already has a too advanced agenda in Hostile Takeover. With that, Wayland decks could potentially run up to 6 fast advanceable agendas, and that makes it too easy to turn on certain cards like Archer and Corporate Town. Those cards are meant to be very difficult to res because they require you to make a real sacrifice in terms of agenda points, but Standoff makes it too convenient. So I guess it's good that this is going. I don't need to see it back in System Core. This, however, I'm not so happy about. Just as with Elective Upgrade, I am very utterly upset to see Colossus and Graph go. Alright? These are completely fair cards, and these were very well designed. I think Colossus was a very nice step in the right direction that FFG made to push advanceable ice, right? Advanceable ice, for the most part of the game's history, have been shit, utter shit, or just completely unplayable. Colossus was a very welcome respite. It's a sentry that actually works, an advanceable sentry that you actually want to advance, because not only does it gain strength, its subroutines also gain power, and that's really nice. Sadly, the devs decided that Colossus wasn't worth keeping in the game anymore. I don't know why. I'm looking at the Wayland sentries. There's Archer and Caduceus, both of which were 2-off in System Core. You could easily change one of them to a 1-off and put Colossus back in. So I really don't see why. I think Colossus is fine. If anything, I think it's still too weak for an advanceable ice. There's a reason why no one's playing advanceable ice Wayland right now. Colossus is good, but not competitively good. Yeah. If I were to have things my way, I would keep Colossus. My only hope that I can see is that the designers were intending to design perhaps a Colossus 2.0 or some different advanceable sentry ice, and they would not like the game to be saturated with so many advanceable sentries that are powerful. If that's the case, I think removing Colossus is justifiable. Otherwise, by removing Colossus right now, that's yet another archetype that's dead in the water. As if advancement-based advanceable ice Wayland was weak prior to System Core, it now is just flat out unplayable because one of their most powerful advanceable ice in Colossus has been taken out of the card pool. So yeah. I'm really not sure what the thinking of this is. Maybe Team NISEI can shed some enlightenment on this. But we'll move on for now. I think Graph being removed is a bigger issue. For the exact same reasons as Elective Upgrade. It's the most powerful squishy 5-3 agenda in the Wayland faction. And I mean, you just look at Scorpio's decks that used to exist. They needed to run a 5-3 agenda that wasn't Global Food Initiative, and you know, all of them just defaulted to Graph because Graph is good, and it encourages good gameplay. It rewards players with high skill level because choosing 3 cards from your deck is actually harder than you think it is. Choosing the optimal 3 cards, there's a lot of decision making going on behind it. And it's on a suitable power level. If you score a 5-3 agenda in Wayland, you deserve such a powerful effect. Except that you don't anymore, because Team Nisei decided that Graph should go out of the window. I'm a bit upset. I guess this is more justifiable than Elective Upgrade, because currently in System Core, Wayland is saturated with more important Wayland agendas, namely Hostile Takeover and Oaktown Renovation. So there's no space to put Graft in. So for that, I guess it's acceptable, but it still doesn't take away the fact that I'm lamenting Graft's loss. I will miss this agenda, for sure. Right. Hello, Blue Sun. We thought that Blue Sun was going to fade away to nothingness, that the sun has, collapsed into a dwarf and is now at the end of its lifespan, first with Oversight being removed and with Rotation looming. But nope, Nisei decides to give it a second life, and I think this is a wonderful decision by Team Nisei. Why? Now, as you might have noticed from the competitive meta, there are lots of Wayland archetypes that exist recently during Euros, Nationals, and Worlds period. There's a very good diversity of Wayland decks, but the one Wayland archetype that's missing is Glacier. We have tag-based Wayland in Argus. We have Rig Shooter Wayland in Scorpios. And Outfit is even a viable ID for playing tag-based Wayland in. But there's a reason why Glacier Wayland doesn't exist, and it's not just because Wayland Ice suck. Wayland has no good defensive upgrades, and Wayland doesn't really have any IDs that, encourage you to go vertical. Until now. So this is where Blue Sun comes in to save the day. Wayland now has an option of playing a very different style of Glacier from NBN, from Jinteki, from HB. Play big ice and res them with Oversight AI. Force the runner to make tempo plays, lose tempo by trashing those ice, by breaking the subroutines before Blue Sun can bounce it back to hand. This is a wonderful, wonderful way to encourage Glacier, and yeah, just provides a very different take and very refreshing take on Glacier that hasn't been seen before. I like Blue Sun as card design. I think it was one of the better design cards in the Lunar Cycle, and I'm happy to see that Team Nisei agrees by bringing it back into the meta. Yes, Blue Sun is very much fun. As Reality Check mentioned, they played Blue Sun in his Nisei Snack Draft by accident, and it's still fun. I have to agree. Blue Sun is not only fun, it also provides a very, it raises the skill cap on Glacier play. You have to consider every single turn whether you want to bounce the ice back. Because while it gives you a lot of burst economy, it also comes at the cost of tempo. You lose the click that you spent installing the ice. Blue Sun is a very fun ID. And making it good by reintroducing Oversight AI is, a very good move on Nisei's part. Vadim makes a very good point. You don't necessarily have to play Glacier and Blue Sun. If anything, I think people will tend towards Rush, simply because Oversight AI is strongest in the early game when the runner hasn't had their breakers out yet. I think I agree with that, and I think you'll see a lot of hybrid Rush / Glacier decks out of Blue Sun, where you pump out Oak Towns early and try to close out late game with very taxing ice, perhaps a defensive upgrade, and a 5-3 agenda. That is how I envision Blue Sun to be played competitively, and I think that is a welcome addition to the meta, right? Because at least it's another Wayland archetype that isn't Rig Shooter or hard-hitting news. Right, let me read some of the comments. Quagos mentions many of these tougher decisions have entirely come down to limited space in the core set. Yep, that's true. There are only so many slots in the core set. I guess that's why Graft went away. That is not a good excuse for removing Colossus though. Let's see. Fast Advance and Titan. Yep, Chaos of 99. Good shout. I forgot about Titan. Yes, Titan Fast Advance was and still is a thing. I forgot to mention that entirely. That is a viable archetype. Do, do, do. Reality check. 171 credits gained in one game. I hope you recorded that game because that is some massive achievement unlocked. Quagos. Blue Sun is super cool. It's not exactly what I feel Wayland should be, but until we can print new cards that fill its related design space, Blue Sun will suffice. Interesting. Yeah, I also am struggling to think of how to improve Wayland's design space because currently as it stands, a lot of Glacier Wayland revolves around the advanceable ice, which are pretty shit. There's no other way to look at it. I've done a video on advanceable ice in the past, and yeah, it's a very tricky design space to approach because, as I mentioned in that video, it can be very polarizing. If advanceable ice are pushed too much, if they're too strong, then you encourage decks where the correct move is to continuously advance your ice to the point where the runner cannot feasibly break them, and that's not going to be fun Netrunner, I think. So yeah, it's very tricky design space to broach, and I don't envy Team NISEI's position in that regard. I can't think of any way to, balance advanceable ice properly myself. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I am so sorry. This was a very big mistake. Yeah, this symbol is not the TD symbol. Standoff is not in TD, so standoff will still be legal and we'll see play. Okay. Sorry, ignore this entire slide. Whoops. Thanks for pointing that out. Whoops. Okay. Illegal Arms Factory. That can go, I guess. I mean, it's. I don't really have much opinion on it. Right. Okay. Yep. So that's Blue Sun. Finally, let's round this video off with one neutral card. False Lead has vanished. It was in the revised core set, but it's no longer in the system core. Again, just like with Illegal Arms Factory, I don't really have an opinion on this. I think it adds an interesting dimension to the game, where it enables certain kill decks or tag decks that trip up the runner when they, end a run on the second click while tagged or, with not enough cards in hand. It also helps enable decks like Jemison, where you can sacrifice False Lead during a run to put advancement counters on something or to trigger Highline Grid, False Lead has a lot of exciting and useful users, so it's kind of a shame to see it go. But on the other hand, if you think about it, that's what rotation does. No matter which cycle you're rotating out, there's always going to be at least one card that is interesting or adds something, new to the game that is going to disappear completely because of rotation. And in this example, False Lead was that card. So it's not a bad thing. I think it's good that the game replaces old cards with new cards, and I'll be excited to see what new cards are on the horizon. Some different ways to enable, to boost net damage archetypes, tag-based archetypes, Gemisons, and Highline Grid archetypes. Probably not Highline Grid since that's going to rotate soon as well. But there you go. Let's address some questions in the chat. Hive is gone. I'm also very happy about that. That is a very poorly designed piece of ice, and I'm glad to see it go. Why did Nisei save IPO? IPO is fine. If you look on the runner side, they have a good balance of burst economy and event-based economy and resource-based economy, right? Runners have Showgamma and Dirty Laundry as burst neutral economy, and they have Daily Cast and Armitage as ongoing economy, resource-based economy. So similarly, Corps have something similar going on. For event-based economy, they have Hedge Fund and IPO, and for asset-based economy, they have NGO Front and Rashida. Now, I know that's not a very exact comparison because obviously Rashida and NGO Front are not drip economy cards. They are kind of burst economy, just like Hedge and IPO. But I think it's good to have all these different kinds of economy options in the game to suit different players' needs. IPO is not an auto-include in every deck. For example, you won't see IPO being played in CTM at all. Yeah, because why play IPO when you have asset-based economy to boost your money? So yeah. Melange is gone, yes. Melange is okay-ish. Kind of superseded by NGO Front for the most part, if I would be honest. So not the biggest deal. Let's see other. Yep. Okay. So that's mostly it from the comment section. So to conclude, after seeing all this list of changes, I have to commend the NISEI team. They did a fairly good job of identifying some very key weaknesses in the current card pool and addressing them with system core. I think one very inspired choice was identifying terminal directive as the weak link for various reasons, and I hope that through this video I've demonstrated that indeed it is for the better good of the game that terminal directive goes away. There were too many problematic cards in it, and it was imbalancing the factions, giving a different number of giving some factions more cards than others. So yeah, that was really good. I also really like the fact that NISEI brought back some skill testing cards that will make the game more fun. These cards are like KD Jones and John Masnori, cards that will probably be competitive and will hopefully lead to more dynamic and interesting gameplay experiences. On the other hand, I've also mentioned that there were some very questionable choices that NISEI has made that I think need to be addressed in future expansion releases. Most importantly, I think Sunny needs to be looked at very urgently, because I think it's just not right to cull an entire mini faction just because of reasons, right? Yeah, and same goes for things like Rig Shooter. I don't think you should call an entire archetype just because some people don't like it. There are definitely ways to make Rig Shooter fun without being overbearing or negative player experience. And certain cards that they have now reintroduced, like R&D Interface and Fetal AI, need to be more carefully looked at. The other thing is I hope they will also print more non-defensive 5-3 agendas that are powerful, because we have lost Graft and Elective Upgrade. Those were some really big losses. I don't expect people to be playing squishy 5-3s anytime in the near future. Finally, if there's one last thing to be mentioned, I think the YouTube chat here has been mostly positive for the most part, but just keep in mind when making points of criticism towards the Team NISEI that at the end of the day, Team NISEI is run entirely by a group of volunteers. These people are not getting paid for the work that they're doing. They are doing it out of their own passion for the game. So just keep that in mind, that they have no obligation at all to make a perfect game for you. Without their existence, we'll be stuck with the revised core set and the end of game card pool for the rest of eternity. So would you prefer the changes they made in system core to not making any changes at all? I think so. Right? So yeah, do be measured in your criticism towards NISEI, because I think they've put in a lot of hard work and they've done a pretty good job with system core as a whole. Sebastian Hammer asks, does Wayland have any good 5-3s left? Yes, they do have a lot of 5-3s. I think Wayland has more 5-3s than any other faction. The problem is they're all bad. Or rather not good enough to justify running 5-3s in your deck. Right? That's the biggest problem. Chaos of 99 mentions, it really seems like System Core is swinging things even more in favor of Corp, when Corp was already having up runners, except for Anarch, where they got to keep good economy cards. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. If you have seen Apocalypse 419 decks out there, they are pretty strong right now. Right? If you haven't tried that, be sure to try it, because it is a pretty strong archetype right now. Shaper has various competitive decks. I think you saw at Worlds that there was a sizable representation of Shaper. And we are going... Yeah, so yeah, I think the factions are in a good place right now. I definitely disagree that, there is an Anarch bias. The only reason why there seems to be an Anarch bias in the video that I currently made is because in Terminal Directive, Anarch was not represented at all. So it only makes sense that criminals and shapers were losing more cards than Anarch was. But functionally, at the competitive level, not much has changed for the runner side in terms of faction balance. Uh, do, do, do. Alright. Yep. That's about it. Oh, I forgot to mention, yeah, City Works project. Yeah, that's a good shout. Yeah, it's not as good as the other defensive 5-3 agendas in other factions though. Okay. So that's the end of this video. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you. No, just kidding. We'll continue on this video since we have the time. We are going to talk about the most wanted list. Right? This was a quick edition since yeah, there's not really much to talk about the most wanted list. There's not a lot of changes. Firstly, the democracy cards, which are those orc crime cards like Watch the World Burn and Hired Help, have been officially banned. Those cards were not play tested at all. They were just voted on by the people and were a random mishmash of various card types and card texts into a card that just doesn't make sense. The limit 1 per deck is stupid. So I'm very glad to see these cards go, and glad to see that NISEI is formally, officially removing these cards from play. Next thing. Yep. There were no removals from the most wanted list, so everything that was in the old most wanted list still remain on the new most wanted list. The only changes were that some cards were newly added or upgraded within the most wanted list. Let's see what these changes are. Right, first let's start with the removed cards. Brian Stinson has been upgraded from restricted to remove. Again, I think this is a good move. In the same vein as Shadownet, this is a card that does not need to exist. It provides too swingy of an economic advantage, and it provides recursion. So two things that are pretty powerful on their own, but when put together gives a card that's just too powerful, a card that's too high variance. Brian Stinson was not very good design. Being able to play IPO for 13 credits or being able to play Ultraviolet Clearance for free is just outright dumb, and this card has no place in the game. I'm glad to see it on the remove list. It can stay there for the rest of its tenure. Next, restricted. Okay, these are all restricted cards that directly address the metagame that we saw at Worlds 2018. We saw that the two most dominant Corp archetypes were Mti Glacier and CTM, Tempo CTM. We also saw that on the runner side, one of the most dominant runners was Valencia / Max. There were a lot of Valencia and Max decks running about. Anarch was just a bit above the other factions with regards to power level. So these are the changes that will help keep everything back in line. Mti Wenkundu is now going on the restricted list, which is a very big hit for Mti because this implies that you cannot play your favorite defensive 5-3 agendas in Global Food or Obokata Protocol. So yeah, so that's quite a big deal. It's still playable, right? It's on the restricted list, so you can take it as your restricted card, but yeah, you'll be forced to reconsider your life choices here. I'm not sure if this affects the political dealings MT deck. I think that is still playable, I think. I'm not very sure. That might be the strongest MT deck moving forward. Excalibur has also been hammered. I think this is a very important change, especially with RP coming back. Being able to put Excalibur on one of the centrals and making that central unrunnable if you don't have an AI breaker is kind of a dumb concept. So yeah, basically I think most AI only ice, that means mythic or trap ice, should be single use, or should have a way to be broken other than just by using AI breakers. For example, Chimera, which has long since rotated, gain a certain subtype of the Corp's choice, which is fair. Excalibur is not fair because you cannot break it with traditional breakers, so it's gotta go, especially now that RP is coming back. For CTM, there were lots of ways to hit CTM. They could have restricted CTM itself, they could have restricted Daily Business Show, Mamba Virtual Tour, AR Enhanced Security. There are lots of ways to go about it. I think they did it the best possible way by restricting Commercial Bankers Group. I from day one, from the very beginning, I was not a fan of political assets at all. I think in one of my previous Most Wanted List discussion videos, I was happy to see bioethics, Senti Actors Union, and clone suffrage movement hit the MWL, but I lamented that CBG wasn't on it. Just because CBG provides money and the rest provides some unique effect doesn't mean that CBG should be left off the hook. I'm glad that people have finally come to their senses and realized that CBG is indeed a problem. It is way too efficient for its cost, and it really needs to go. I guess it's not ban worthy. I would personally ban it as a matter of principle as with all political assets. But I think this is a suitable compromise. Means that you basically cannot play CBG in CTM anymore. If you do, you won't have access to global food, which drastically increases your agenda fragility. Paperclip, well, that's one way to hit both Max and Val, I guess. I personally would rather have seen rebirth on the restricted list, just because rebirthing into Omar is a very dumb interaction that is way too powerful. Valencia rebirthing into Omar comes with no downside at all, because you're not losing any text on Valencia, while gaining a very huge upside on Omar, which is supposed to be a 12 influence identity. So yeah, I would much rather have seen rebirth restricted. I think Paperclip did not really it's okay. I mean, I can see reasons for it being restricted. It's by no means the strongest barrier breaker. It's the most consistent, I guess, but it's by no means the strongest. Lady does some things better. Lamb does some things better. So yeah, Paperclip is by no means the one and only possible competitive factor in the game. But I guess if you wanted to take Anarch down a notch, this would be the way to go. Hitting any other Anarch card would be pretty unfair to the Anarch card itself, right? Because there's no standout Anarch card in regular Valencia or regular Max that justifies being put on the restricted list other than just to hate on Anarch, which I feel isn't a sufficiently good enough reason to put things on the restricted list. Alright, so that's all for the Most Wanted list. Let me address some of the comments in the YouTube comments. Okay, Chaos mentions Stinson gone and bankers restricted at least helps a bit on the imbalance between Corp and runner economy. This I kind of agree with. I think there's some really problematic burst economy options on the Wayland side, most notably the outfit. I think outfit decks are far too filthy rich, and that is kind of a problem, right? They have agendas that give them money, operations that give them money, a huge critical mass of money cards that are all very good. So yeah, that I'm not too happy about, but you're right in that commercial bankers group and Stinson gone tones things down a bit on the Corp side, which is actually quite important because on the runner side there are not that many credit denial options, right? Account siphon is not back, so yeah, it's good to actually temper down Corp economy to give runners some the option of outmoneying the Corp basically. Sebastian mentions Paperclip being restricted is a good choice, makes committing to bin breakers with inject and all harder, or takes strike away from Anarchs still choosing bin breakers. Good ruling. Yeah, I think that was the main intention behind the Paperclip restriction. So you either choose the entire bin breaker suite, or employee strike. I think most runners will go with employee strike. Paperclip is a good breaker, but not super good enough to justify running as a restricted card, whereas strike covers a lot of corps that are good right now. I think what you'll see is regular Anarch decks will switch to Corroder instead, which means that they will probably want to run Clone Chip to get Corroder out of the bin. So that is how the decks will change. It'll be worse than the old Anarch decks. By how much, I can't really say. Alright, Vadim mentions a point that is pretty valid. The main issue I have is that we've been targeting these assets than the real enabler CTM. If you think about it, RP is kind of powerful. It is almost as powerful as CTM, I would reckon. Right? So CTM says if you want to trash my assets this turn, you have to take a tag. RP says if you want to trash my assets this turn, you have to make a run on a central. This means losing a click. This also means eating whatever potential face check I have on my central ice. Both are pretty awful to deal with. So if you want to put CTM on the restricted list, you might have to put RP on the restricted list as well. Because don't forget, RP can splash for Commercial Bankers Group as well. And that is going to be pretty miserable to deal with. Okay. Chaos mentions, is employee strike not significantly weaker now that MT is restricted? My answer is nope. Let's see, what are the good HB identities? Sports Metal, that's basically the only one. Next Design, you can argue that Next Design is good. So Next Design is basically the only ID out there that Strike is completely blank against. Jinteki, RP, Ag Infusion, MT Wenkundu. All three of these you would really love to have Employee Strike against. Okay, no question. So Employee Strike is still really, really, really good against Jinteki. NBN, Asmari AdTech, CTM. I would absolutely kill to have Employee Strike against these two identities, making it easier to trash assets and making it harder for Asmari to res their expensive ice. Employee Strike is still really, really, really good against NBN. Wayland, we have Argus, Outfit, Titan. I would kill to have Employee Strike against all these three IDs as well. Yeah, making it much easier for me to run and steal agendas against Argus. Stopping Titans fast advance in their tracks, and against the Outfit, suppressing their economy by making sure they don't gain 3 credits, extra credits every time they score a hostile or play a too big to fail. Again, Employee Strike is dumb, it's super good, it blanks IDs, but I would still play it as my restricted card 90% of the time in the current competitive meta, because it still does a whole boatload of work against all these IDs. No other restricted card even comes close, right? Even if this means giving up Paperclip, I'm more than happy to do it if it means that I can completely shut down Jinteki Glacier's ability to kick me off their servers, or to force me into running centrals, or CTM's ability to take dish tags onto me. Employee Strike is still really, really good. To answer Cody's question, is this being recorded so I can go back and watch? Yes, you might not be able to watch it immediately because of how YouTube's live streaming works, but eventually it will be up as a video on demand. Yeah. That's about it. Yep, not much else to mention. So I think I'll call off this video for now. It's been a very long running video. We started about 1 hour 45 minutes ago. So yeah, I think it's a good time to call it off. Thanks everyone for joining me, and thanks to everyone for providing the live chat. It was good listening to your thoughts and responding to your queries and questions. And I hope you enjoyed this dynamic discussion with myself and learned about what the new system core has in store for everyone. I hope everyone enjoys the new meta moving forward. Good question. When is it in effect? I think it's not in effect immediately, but I think people will start playtesting all these new decks regardless. As always, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll catch you in a future video where I'll talk about my celebrity gift tournament and how that went. Yeah, I've been holding that off for a very long time. I just needed to get this out of the out straight away, since it's a very big announcement. But we'll resume our scheduled broadcast with charity gift next time. So thanks everyone again. Till next time, happy net running. Goodbye.